Chair, if I could.
Oh, you okay with that, Neil? Yes. James will just lead the way.
So, Chair, if I could give some advice in relation to what could be funded by way of a contribution to the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Foundation. We have currently $40,000 allocated to supporting the strategy, and that is going to fund Keiko's time, particularly in terms of the science program underpinning it. We also managed to reprioritise in the last financial year just over $40,000 to undertake the ecosystem mapping tool. Keiko advises that there is another $30,000 required to finish that in the coming financial year. We propose funding that from the $60,000 that sits currently in the Kickstart Fund package for biodiversity. So there was money set aside in that for biodiversity. That would leave $30,000 remaining in the Kickstart Fund, and it's my view that we could also trim $20,000 out of the carry forward from the strategy development consultancy budget to bring $50,000 together without an undue impact on the rest of the council's priorities and work program. So that would be $50,000 contribution to the foundation, and then the council would continue to support the science program underpinning that. And I think that that is probably about right in terms of where we're at today. It would give sufficient funding to the foundation to go into the wider philanthropic market and leverage further funding. So that's probably a reasonable solution at this stage.
Thank you, James. Councillor Curtin.
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for that, Mr. Chief Executive. And as a result of that discussion over the tea break, the resolution on the board is in front of us, and that's to agree to continue support for implementation of the biodiversity strategy within existing resources, and to provide $50,000 dedicated funding in 2017-18. So that's I'm happy to move that resolution and the annual plan accordingly, Mr. Chair.
Mover and a seconder.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think we just cannot walk away and not provide at least a measure of support to enable the work to continue and the momentum to continue. In many respects, the biodiversity strategy is and ought to be and deserves to be a cornerstone of the work we do, particularly in relation to all the initiatives that we've proposed, so that every piece of work that the council does in regard to the new initiatives up and down the region, the biosecurity activities we've got, the land management issues we've got, every part of the organisation should be infiltrated by the strategy, by the biodiversity strategy. So whenever we're thinking about protecting a particular part of the environment or the waterway or any part of the areas that we're looking to manage, we should have reference to biodiversity. What are the species that we're trying to protect? What are the values that we're wanting to enhance? What we've got is a very substantial investment already of this council's time, previous council's contributions, and particularly this new group forming, and this gives that opportunity for that group to really get its skates on. I would comment, Mr. Chair, that with $50,000 in their coffers, I am certain they can raise at least 150 in addition to that, if they put their minds to that, those resources that are out there currently. So it's to me it's a no-brainer to be making this sort of minimal gesture as it is.
Thank you, Tom.
I would support the resolution, obviously, and I would ask, without any need to change this language or anything, that we come up with an articulation of what our, a quantification of what our internal commitment is, so that we can represent that more clearly to the constituencies involved as to what our level of effort behind this actually does amount to, in addition to this 50,000. I'd also note that, some time ago, councillors Pipe and myself were appointed to work with this group, and somewhere along the line that just seems to have disappeared. I'm not quite sure what happened along the way there, but my feeling is that the group has it sounds like it's done a terrific job without any councillor meddling, but at the same time it hasn't had arguably the representation within our circles.
That's right.
That it deserved to have over the last year or so, since we somehow exited the process. So, if wearing no other hat as chairman of the Environment Committee, I would intend to get a little more stuck into this, including the fundraising aspect of it, which I know something about, as we go forward here.
Thank you. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. During this morning's discussions, we've sent a message to a number of submitters around their funding being under review. And look, I totally get the fact that this funding we're looking at under this proposal is very much interim, and it's very much this year, and it's to get us through into the long-term planning process. So I would like to see that we send a message to the biodiversity strategy, and especially to our staff that are involved with the biodiversity strategy, that don't be afraid to be bold in terms of what they're looking at for the long-term plan and their plans for that they put to us for consideration, because I think this is where we need to be looking at, as a council, something like the biodiversity strategy very, very seriously, and with a view to increasing funding.
Mr. Chairman, just to ask Chief Executive, seriously, do you think it's worth investigating the engagement or the costs and other implications of engagement of professional fundraiser?
Look, I'd like to take that question away and explore it a little further. I'd make two observations. One is that professional fundraisers are typically reasonably expensive to procure, and the second would be that there seems to be a good number of experienced fundraisers that are volunteering their time to this particular initiative, and it may well be that we can have some really good expertise and effort applied to fundraising here at relatively low cost, and I'd like to explore that first with a professional fundraiser perhaps as a backup option.
Okay.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. I will support this. I would have supported more, but if $100,000 had been put up as a motion, I would have supported that as well. But $50,000 is the number, and I will support that. There are two things that I'd like to see happen during the course of the next 12 months. The first is that the momentum that the proposed foundation has currently built up is not lost, and that the money that we are agreeing to supply through this motion is used to enable them to develop a greater funding, a bigger funding base, and at the end of the day, the whole purpose of having a foundation like this is so that we can draw money from outside of this council to what is what I'm expecting to be a widely held community project, or a widely supported community project. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we've already got the elements of a number of biodiversity projects that we are doing internally here, and we have to somehow make sure that those things are integrated in some way into the longer term aims, ambitions and activities of this foundation, and I don't know what that's going to look like. Nobody around this table really is across that level of detail, but certainly that's what needs to happen.
We have a mover and a seconder for the motion as it is up there for $50,000 essentially, and amend the plan. All those in favour? Aye. Against? No. We have one vote against. The motion is carried. Okay, we go to, I thought that was item 17. That was item 16 on my little sheet. Rex McIntyre one, 16.
Yeah, 16.
Yeah, but no, she got it wrong, I think.
I'd like to move 16.3, Chair.
Before we do that, is there any discussion around this, maybe from
Just I'd be interested to hear Councillor Bailey say why he doesn't want to meet with Mr McIntyre.
that is the substance of our discussion. We do have a mover from all 1, 2 and 3?
No, just 3.
Just 3.
I will explain myself, Chair, if you want to.
Do we have a second for that?
Oh no, I would think that as the past chair of the regional council that he deserves a bit more of a courtesy than no discussion.
Well, it hasn't been seconded, Chair, so I'm happy to move 1, 2 and 3.
Hasn't been seconded, lapsed. We're going to move for 1, 2 and 3. Do we have a seconder for 1, 2 and 3? We have Alan Dick, Councillor Dick. Okay, you wish to speak?
Just very briefly, I thought the conversation that Mr McIntyre sort of back-ended, if you like, a bit of what has been done, and I think we're pretty quick to forget that we have done a lot around Tūtera. We've had varying elements of success. This year particularly poor showing of the lake, and maybe sometimes you've got to look to your past to decide where you've got to go in the future. So I think that little piece of input would be useful. It does not take anything away from Mangaruru, Tangatu and the farming group, etc., that have been meeting for years now. So, and I think anyone, including Councillor Bailey's input, as a new fresh set of eyes on top of the other experience, can only be good. So I wish them well.
Thank you. Alan. Councillor Bailey, it's your turn now.
Thank you, Chair. Look, the only reason I didn't want to move 16.1 is I thought that's actually a request under Lagoima, so in which case it should be covered under there already. In 16.2, I have absolutely no problem meeting with Mr McIntyre. I think that learning the history of what's gone on in the past at the lake is a really, really useful thing. It's just that I didn't think we needed to specifically set up a meeting with him and the other parties involved with Tūtera. He can simply he's more than welcome to join in future, in the future when we get all those parties together at any rate. I just see him as being part of that rather than having a specific meeting, especially for him.
Tom.
I just note that when we get to 17.1, we'll have a more generalized statement of inviting all submitters to such a meeting, which includes Mr. McIntyre.
I'd just like to comment. I think everyone makes really good points about that. I thought Rex McIntyre brought an old but fresh view, certainly a view I hadn't heard, and I really enjoyed his presentation. And I think having people like that involved that really love this lake and know something about it is a really good thing. But having said that, Councillor Bay, I think you're right. He should just be in the general discussion of things. But nevertheless, I will support this as it is. So, do you want a final comment? We have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. Against? This motion is carried. Number 17 is... Do we have any discussion before you want to move straight away, Tom? So simple enough. If we have, yeah, I think we have just discussed it.
Can I just add, Chair, that I have had discussions with Mr Maxwell, and that's following the whatever happens for the annual plan process. That's sort of there's already plans in place to start that sort of a process.
So we have a mover for 17.1, 17.2 and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Have we just discussed it? Against? It's carried. Number 18.
Can we just remove the first one? Because he'll be
I
invited
have a
as
question, Chair.
submitter.
Yes, I'm just trying to get through it. Okay, right. Debbie, question?
Thank you. Just with regard to the Plan Change 6 requirements, James, I'm wondering if you can tell us the implications of the loss of the $100,000 carry forward from the land management team.
I'll ask Mr Maxwell to come forward and give us an account of that.
So could I perhaps just get some clarification on the question? What do you want? What was?
I lose track of the days. Monday last week, when we were doing our deliberating, the majority of councillors decided to can the $100,000 carry forward from the land management team, which I spoke against. So I'm wondering what the implications of that are for that team.
Sure. So the proposal for the carry forward was in essence the funding that had been set aside to incentivise farm plans for the Tuki catchment. So you may recall that in an effort to try and boost the numbers of plans coming through, we offered to provide a financial incentive to get people to move the farm planning process along. Uptake of that was fairly weak at best. I think there was only a handful of people that took advantage of that. I suspect there are a number of reasons why. I'm not sure that it was particularly well socialised or marketed or advertised. So I'm not sure of the awareness of people in terms of the availability of that funding. And ultimately, if that funding's lost, it doesn't change, I guess, the council's work, in that we still have to ensure that those plans are delivered for the catchment. It doesn't change the requirement for landowners to provide them by next year, middle of next year, I think it is. What it does do is remove a potential lever to help get some of them in the door. It's really, really hard to judge the impact of losing it, because on face value there wasn't a lot of interest when it was first offered up. Whether that's a reflection, like I say, of a lack of awareness or marketing or socialisation of the opportunity, I don't know. So it's difficult to say, look, if we lose the money, will it have a major impact? The reality is, if you recall the paper justifying the carry forward, there are only about 150 farm plans, albeit that they are farm plans that cover a fairly significant physical area of the catchment, but they're the relatively small number of the 1,100 odd that are required for the catchment. So there's still a large body of work for both landowners and the council on the catchment. So I can't quantify the impact of losing the $100,000. I can't tell you whether that's going to knock us back by, if we added it back in, would it put us a month ahead or a year ahead, or if we took it out, how much it's going to delay it. It's very difficult to say. What I would say is that if it was back in the mix, and with myself having oversight of this, I would be looking for a lot more effort in promoting the availability of this, and perhaps targeting individuals to have plans developed in our priority subcatchments, rather than just being passive and waiting for people to come to us. We might take an approach that actually goes out and markets it or targets it to areas we see it's required.
Can I just, but we have to do that anyway. They've only got 11 months, all of them, to
So-
get their plans in. So
Yeah.
the incentive is the fact that they're
Got a
out
deadline.
of time in 11 months. Money's not got any impact on that, I don't think.
And it's an interesting one because you would have thought that having a deadline in next year and the fact that if these farm plants aren't with us next year, they've got to seek resource consent would have been a significant motivator. Add to that some financial, a bit of lolly to make it easier. I'm surprised that it hasn't been picked up. I wasn't directly involved in the establishment and running of the fund, and like I say, the only thing I could imagine is that perhaps awareness of it was such that people didn't see it was available. But in typical Kiwi fashion, it looks as though a lot of people are waiting to the last minute before they do anything.
Okay, councillors, I respect the question because it does refer to 18.3, but I don't think we need to relitigate that whole issue. Are there any more questions to the substantive issues in here? Or any discussion? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just there's a point made in his submission that I'm not suggesting we need to amend the recommendation, but just for everyone's benefit, he said on page 27, Plan Change 6 is a bold, forward-looking strategy which will ensure the sustainable use of our environment for generations. Council are to be commended for implementing PC6. And then he says, the point needs to be made at the outset that PC6 was never developed and intended to be implemented in unison with the dam, as has been asserted by so-and-so and so-and-so. The reality is that PC6 was developed and was intended to be implemented in unison with the dam. However, the Board of Inquiry came to their own conclusion, right or wrong, that PC6 should stand on its own.
Councillor, just to address that, there is a difference of opinion around this table, and I actually on one occasion asked the directors of HBRC about that, and they said it was not in unison.
Well,
so, I just don't think we should argue about it now. That's your view, and I have a different view.
That is my view. And
yeah,
I was
thank
there,
you. And
I was there at the time.
Appreciate your view.
You weren't.
I'm fine. Debbie.
I'm prepared to move 18.1, .2, .3 and .4.
All of them. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes, seen as it ties in with the number as well.
I'm happy to take that if there's no other questions. So do we have a seconder for that? Second by Paul. Do you wish to speak, Debbie? Paul? Anyone else wish to speak? Okay, we're moving the whole lot together, 1, 2, 3 and 4. All those in favour? Right. Against? Motion is carried, and we'll move to the next one, number 19. Guardians of the Aquifer. This will be interesting. Okay, we'll put it up. Now, Ian, I think I'm going to require you to have a chat about this. What's your thoughts? I know you're fresh back off the boat and your mind is elsewhere.
Well, look, I'm happy to provide comment. Obviously, I've briefly read the submission and only just now reading the response. And I completely understand their concerns and the views and the issues they're raising. It's one of these situations where the issues being raised are probably not the sorts of things you can deal with in an annual plan process, because it's effectively consenting related matters, which has its own process that has to be run through. And I think the points that are made in the officer's response are the right ones, and that we understand absolutely the issues around wellhead integrity and the requirement for greater scrutiny of bore security and bore management, that we have embarked on a pretty comprehensive program to look at bores within a 1,000 metre radius of the drinking water supply bores in the region, and that work is ongoing. That we are investing more significantly, not only in monitoring, but you're aware of the science program around groundwater in the region generally, and that, as the 19.4 points out, that whilst those concerns are real and can be expressed, the right process for that is through the consent. And bearing in mind, of course, that we don't yet know with any great clarity whether there is, whether the Hastings District Council will be seeking to use bores 1 and 2 in Brookvale. It may be that they don't wish to. It may be that they just continue to use bores 3. So it would be premature to try and judge it now ahead of the consent expiry, which is May next year, and the applicant or the consent holder doing their due diligence and working with us in terms of what their plans are.
Thank you, Ian. Just
question?
before we go, do you want to ask a question of Ian?
Yeah. Can you confirm in whether the Hawke's Bay Regional Council has the power to say no to the Hastings District Council without first hearing their case on reopening any of these bores?
No, you couldn't preempt it unless it was prohibited in the plan, which it's not. If they chose to put in an application for all 3 bores tomorrow, then we would have to process it as with any other application, and it would have to work its way through the process. And naturally, any issues or concerns that the council had would be expressed through the process, but all the rights and availability to natural justice exist for the applicant, as well as our obligations as a regulator to run a robust process.
Supplementary, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we'll turn them.
Just to follow up to that question, can Mr. Maxwell confirm that the current consent conditions and the status of the borehead are compliant with the current consent conditions?
So the bore 1 and 2 aren't being used at the moment, and I would say that bore 1 probably isn't compliant with conditions, but it's not being used. And bore 2 has been recently, the bore string has been pulled, i.e. the physical infrastructure inside the bore has been removed and is in the process of being refurbished. And once it's been through that process and been put back in the ground, it probably would be.
This council and your staff would be monitoring that outcome. And going to the question though, you have powers to close the bore down, subject to your consideration of the compliance conditions.
If we had concerns about the state of the infrastructure, yes, we have all the rights and all the powers under the RMA. The other point I'd make is just that these bores are central to quite a range of discussions within the joint working group that the Regional Council is part of, including maintenance, management and reporting of such to all the parties, including the drinking water assessors. So, yeah.
Tom, and then Paul, then back to you, Alan.
So just another point of clarification about this. The Board of Inquiry can't intervene in this process. The use of these bores, either under the current conditions or if new applications are brought forward, that is the process. That we don't have a situation where the Board of Inquiry can come in over the top and say, do this or do that, or don't do this, or...
So the inquiry isn't a panel or an authority that can override the RMA. So the RMA process remains.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Question for Ian through you. Given obviously the concerns expressed in the public about the bores 1, 2 and 3 and what's happened, and I suppose this question is hypothetical, Ian, more than anything else, is if there was an application for resource consent for, say, bore 3, to renew bore 3 next year, what do you think the likelihood is of that particular consent being, say, publicly notified versus being just interested parties?
I would hazard a guess there would be some form of notification, because the the reality is that those takes have stream depleting effects on the nearby Maungatiritiri stream, so they have effects that are broader than the activity itself, the localised effects. So I would imagine that there would be some form of notification. Notification and the need for that is obviously very much about the effect of the activity and whether that can be avoided, remedied or mitigated, and planning provisions. So it's hard to say now exactly what that outcome would be. Given that last time around there was notification and a range of submitters, I suspect that a similar process would probably run this time around. But again, depends on whether it's one bore, all three, and what the effects of that are. So it is very hypothetical.
Question again, Ian. So bore 3 is currently functioning with chlorination, disinfection. Does the consent for that also expire next year?
So the combined 3 takes expire in May next year. Yep.
Okay. And have you had any indication that they may be considering replacing them with bores in safer locations, safer, more secure locations?
I think those are the things that are exercising the mind of the District Council at the moment in terms of what their overall water supply strategy is. I'd say it's a fair bet that given the significant investment in bore 3 that it's unlikely they'll walk away from that, albeit that they've acknowledged that the treatment infrastructure is portable, it could be picked up and moved to another location. But it may be that part of their overall strategy is to, for example, move to a supply further down towards Whakatū to supply Havelock North and Hastings and have Brookvale as a backup. But those are the sorts of things that that I'm sure they're working through to find the best strategy. We'll be learning a bit of that through the joint working group.
Yeah.
And like I say, where we intersect with the process from a legal point of view is if they decide they want to pursue one or any of the bores and seek resource consent for them.
Who's on the joint working group?
So there's participants from the District Council, Napier City Council, the District Health Board, the Drinking Water Assessors, ourselves, and it's facilitated or chaired by Chris Tremaine.
No, that's right. Yeah. And the submitter expressed concerns about bore 5 in Lyndhurst, Frimley. Have your people any similar concerns, or are they looking at it?
Bore 5, so I think bore 5 at Frimley, I don't recall that we've had any specific discussions about bore 5, Frimley bores in the joint working group. What we're working through the joint working group is a process for clarification and understanding around maintenance and management reporting regimes that the council can rely on, as well as others. Some of the concerns that have come out of these bores on the periphery are the result of the water ageing that GNS have conducted recently. And what's not clear at the moment is whether that's a product of the ageing techniques that are being used now, or whether there's an infrastructure issue. So the early view is that there isn't an infrastructure issue back to us, but that's yet to be tested.
I'd like to hand. Denise, you have another question? Do you have
just one more question for Ian. You talked about the stream depleting effect of those bores, and if I recall correctly, they've got till 2018.
May 2018.
So have they given you or us any indication at this point in time as to what alternative sites they may be considering?
Not in any great detail. Like I say, there is an indication they're looking for alternative supplies further down gradient. They did conduct some deeper drilling in the vicinity 2 or 3 years ago to see whether there was resource at depth that may have been unconnected to the Maungatiritiri stream, but that was unsuccessful. So I think probably their strategy may involve avoiding sites that have stream depletion effects, as well as sites that they could find that may gain them secure status or have a more secure supply from a microbiological perspective.
Your question, Tom, is it?
Yeah, I mean, sitting where you do as a consent guru, would you not expect, we're in June now, they face a consent that's going to expire in May of next year. There would be engineering challenges, one would assume, to replacing bore 3 with some other source. They are going through an annual plan process themselves, presumably finding the money to do whatever they're going to do. When would you prudently expect, if you were in their shoes, them to signal us as to what their intentions are? Either continuing the current consent or reapplying for that consent or doing something else?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we had flagged to them last year that deadlines were looming and that we needed to engage in some fairly earnest discussions about the future, in recognising that they have already come in and had some initial, what we would call pre-application discussions, but we still don't have absolute clarity on exactly what it is that they're going to come back to us with as a package. I would hazard a guess that the lack of visibility for us doesn't mean that they're not doing anything necessarily. It's just that it may not have worked out what their strategy or plan is to then bring back to us. But I would be expecting that within, certainly no more than a few months, that we would be having a fairly clear picture of what their plans or strategy was likely to be, given that in order to give them what we call Section 124 rights, to allow them to continue exercising the consent, they needed to have applied for a consent by December this year. So, yeah, so they've got a bit of work to do, and like I say, I'd imagine that there's a lot of work happening in the background. Obviously, they're reconciling a whole lot of other activities as well at the moment.
James.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the annual plan process that we're in at the moment, I wanted to make a couple of remarks about the resource implications of this issue for the council. As councillors are aware, over the financial year that is just coming to a close, we've had a considerable body of work devoted to this area, the external costs of which have been recovered from the Regional Disaster Reserve Fund, but there has been a similar quantum of resource required in terms of staff time. And one of the things that is currently exercising my mind is the sustainability of that level of effort. We have our science manager and our consents manager both on the joint working group, as well as Mr Maxwell there. We have a senior planner who is presently the advisor to the joint working group, and we're providing the secretariat support as well for the joint working group. So the regional council's doing its level best to support and contribute to this exercise, but that is all resource which was doing other things up until recently. And I guess what's arisen from the findings of the Board of Inquiry is an expectation that regional councils nationwide, in giving effect to the National Environmental Standard on Drinking Water Sources, is far more proactively involved with managing drinking water supplies than any regional council, it appears, in New Zealand had hitherto done. And so we haven't made specific budget allocations and provisions at this point in time, because it is something of a moving target as we work through stage 2 of the Havelock North Water Inquiry process, and we get some guidance about what the long-term approach should be for regional councils in this regard. But it's not only the municipal supplies that are in question. We have a large number of community schemes in the region, some of which are privately owned, and we've actually got a good number of those, farm parks, etc., which also come under various levels of regulation, as well as the question of self-supply of individual landowners that have drinking water bores. And so through the coming months of deliberation and engagement with the inquiry, we will be making representations about the issues that we confront as a council and the resourcing implications of those. And one of the things that we will be seeking to ensure is that the collective effort in terms of risk management between health authorities, territorial authorities and regional councils are calibrated in a way that deliver sensible outcomes. And I do think that there is a risk of, in response to what has been an unquestionably terrible event in Havelock North, that all barriers and all parts of the system, in terms of what's called the multi-barrier approach, are ratcheted up to an extent where we as a council have to have a large ongoing dedicated resource securing drinking water supplies. And one of the things I'm keen to ensure, and we provided a submission last night, it was a report from a short report from myself and from Mr. Maxwell to the inquiry ahead of us being before them next week. And we made the point in that we need to ensure that we don't create incentives for any barriers in the multi-barrier approach to be inappropriately calibrated. And by that I mean that we do not shift incentives so that, for example, the Regional Council is left with attempting to eradicate every last potential contaminant on the surface of land in order to ensure that people can put bores wherever they like, whenever they like, as shallow as they like, and should be able to rely on the Regional Council to save them from any pathogen that may arise in drinking water. So we need a sensible set of arrangements, and I think given that there are multiple institutions with their resources at risk in all of this, that we have to be very careful, both for ourselves and on behalf of the regional sector, that we end up with a really sensible set of arrangements. So I'm giving the council forewarning that there is going to be an ongoing impost in terms of our staff time and resources in this area, and there is some uncertainty around what will eventuate from stage 2 of the Havelock North inquiry in terms of our ongoing effort in this regard. And we'll bring advice back in the long-term plan on what the long-term implications may be for the council, but they may well result in us having an ongoing dedicated resource looking at drinking water supply.
Thank you, James. That was a long and informative dissertation from someone who didn't originally want to speak. Well done. Okay, are there any other questions or comments or thoughts around this? Anyone want to change anything?
Well, Mr. Chair, yes. Alan, did you have?
Well, I was just going to say you might not agree that I think the recommended motions, to the extent that we were empowered to do things at this stage, fairly well cover the submitters' concerns. They might like us to do some things which we actually can't do at this
wouldn't
stage.
be proper.
Right, and I think it's important that I hope that if there is an application that it is notified, because there's very significant public interest, obviously. That's how it would start.
Well, Mr. Chair, the only addition to the suite of recommendations in 19 that I've got in mind is that the desire to add that the chairman of council communicate with the Hastings District Council Mayor seeking clarification of its proposals to ensure a secure water supply upon expiry of the consents in May 2018.
Is that the new mayor or the old mayor?
Well, the mayor, whatever that is.
I'm happy with that if everyone else is. I think we do need to get rather moves to Tom's point, get this thing rolling. Where do
So I'm happy, if,
Okay,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5
plus one.
plus 6, yeah.
Yeah.
You're moving that?
Yes, yes,
All of
yes,
those,
yes.
including that one. And we have a seconder. Do you wish to speak, Neil?
Yes, I will briefly, Mr. Chair. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the submitters and the, if you like, the veracity in which they've gone about this, and the sheer grit that they've shown in seeking out some evidence, putting that evidence in front of this council, similarly doing so with the Hastings District Council. So putting the facts out there and drawing obvious conclusions from the facts, which is, in my view, a far more thorough and deliberate exercise than the inquiry itself was able to achieve. So well done, people in the community that invest their time in this way to get at the real truth, as opposed to the Mr. Trump's truth that we seem to have had out of the inquiry. Mr. Chairman, I think the point of adding, if you like, a governance dimension to our approaches, I'm mindful of some of the things Mr. Maxwell's had to say about the consenting process next year being something that'll take its as a matter of course. And while I appreciate that the RMA does prescribe and restrict us somewhat in that in terms of those terms, nevertheless, this is an extraordinary situation. We do need to be diligent, and we do need to have clarity from council well in advance of what their plans are. And I don't think it's out of order to seek that sort of response from council. After all, as it was pointed out, I think by Councillor Belford, that the Hastings District Council will be going through its own processes, allocating resources to it now. So they must know something, and at least we can have some indication that yes, they want to invest there. The other thing that we have been doing in these submissions today is sending a signal to submitters and to other parties as to what our intentions are and what concerns we might have. And I would suggest sending a concern to the Hastings District Council that its continued use of the Brookvale aquifer in the way it's done in the past presents a lot of challenges, and given encouragement to look elsewhere. So those sorts of messages, I think, are appropriate in the circumstances for us to deliver, even though they may not be prescribed in the usual matter of business for such a consenting process.
The only thing, I mean, I would agree with all of those observations, and I just regret that we've had to be so bureaucratically constrained as to say in 19.4, if the application is publicly notified, the supply of drinking water to Hastings and Havelock North and the consenting of that will be probably the most watched consent process ever to happen in Hawke's Bay, and the notion that it would not be publicly notified and that we would even be suggesting that we would consider not publicly notifying it, I think is kind of ridiculous. But if we're bound by some legal constraint to say that, so be it. But I would have to question if there's any councillor around this table who would think that this issue would be resolved in a non-publicly notified process. I'd sure like to hear them speak up now.
Any other comment? Well, we have moved and seconded. I guess you don't want to wrap up. We've moved and seconded. All those in favour of all the, with the including the addition. So it's 1 to 6. Aye. Against. Motion is carried. Thank you. Ah, lucky old you. Number 20, the Wairau District Council. We'll put it up.
That was the geotag.
Yes, I know. Yes, we. Thank you, Pauline. We'll get that.
I just have a question. Chair, there was, when the Mayor of Wairoa appeared here, he raised some questions around the opening and the closing of the mouth of the Wairoa River, and I'm just wondering whether there's any further work we can do there that might lead to better and safer outcomes for the Wairoa community. I don't know whether there's anything we can do or not.
So he did raise that. He raises that with us once a week, and we went to Wairoa, and Councillor Bailey and myself and Councillor Wilson, who lives there, of course, or Frasertown. I'm not sure that's Wairoa. And it was resolved at that meeting. There was a bunch of farmers there and a bunch of councillors and townspeople there. It was resolved that we would work together with them to try and seek the best resolve in that whole issue. There's so many different points of view on what is right and wrong. The locals have a view, our scientists have a view, and Mr. Ady, bless his soul, he had a very firm view on the matter. So I think that we need to do that, and it's going to be driven by Councillor Wilson, I hope, to bring together a group and then come to us and say, this is what needs to happen and this is the cost, and we can consider at that point. But in that process, to use our engineers as well, so that we at least have what they think is the best option. Is that correct, Fenton? That's about it? Do you have any further comment on that, Fenton? Oi! Little chit-chats there. Do you have any further comment on that?
No, other than, we've got to look at the facts as they stand. The last 2 years we've opened the mouth once. So I'm not quite sure what, other than nature opening it, and when she does it's quite spectacular, I can tell you. But the conversation needs to be broad, include river users as well as the expertise that we have in-house, including the contractor that's been opening that bar for the last 20-something years.
Exactly. And if we can go into that without too much predetermination, which will be impossible, I guess, and come out with the right resolve and stop all the bickering, I don't know whether that will stop it, but hopefully we can.
The irony, Chair, is we've been opening the other mouths far more often.
Yeah, that's right.
In the river.
Chair, if I could just suggest that these issues have been around for an awful long time, and
1,000 years
at least. And look, it seems that there is some degree of deficit with respect to a common information base up
That's
there.
Right.
So what I'd like to propose is that the staff bring forward a relatively comprehensive picture of the issues, the options, the costs that exist around both the management of the river mouth and flood protection in the lower reaches of the river, and that we have a concerted engagement with the District Council and the community up there around those options, those costs, etc. And for at least for a period, we get some degree of settlement around what are the issues and what are the options. Whether people will agree on where we go will undoubtedly be difficult to secure universally. But if we get everyone on the same page information-wise, I think that would be a step forward. So I'm going to propose that we bring that back to the council and then take that to Wairoa.
I think it's a good suggestion, but I would propose that before you put any pen to paper, that we have a meeting in Wairoa with the locals and our staff, so that we can get everything on the table and they feel, at least everyone feels that they are involved in the process, rather than us just bringing to them what we think is right, because that's what we've done for a long time and it's not really working. So I think we need to embrace them in the discussion in the first instance. If you could pull that together over the next couple of months, that'd be a very good idea.
Mr. Chairman, it's probably worth in that exercise delving back into history a little bit, because steamers used
That's
to
right.
run from Napier to Wairoa, go over the bar. and it'd be interesting to know how they actually managed the bar back in those days. I think there's still some
certainly
remnants
some
of
of
some piers or whatever.
Certainly some of the locals at those meetings that I've attended, they raise those issues. So it would be really useful exercise to maybe preempt it with a discussion of how it looked in the past, but it's all very different now. I think Fenton has a pretty good grasp of the situation actually, and so he should chair that meeting. And I'll try and be in distant lands.
It won't be happening in the next month on that basis.
Yes, Peter.
Just looking at 20.4, I think probably the wording is wide enough to incorporate what the Chief Executive's just suggested. So I'm happy on that basis to move the recommendations in the paper, 20.1 to 20.5.
Okay, you happy to move it along, Fenton? Second that? Do you want to talk, Peter? Fenton, do you want to say?
I'll just briefly, Chair. It's got a long history, isn't it? It's one of the few towns in the country that the main street faces the river, actually.
Which is wonderful.
Incredible. And it is important to Hawke's Bay. Interestingly, we actually had our own port company up there back in the days. We've retained ownership of it. We've just moved it to Napier. That's all that's happened. So, but in having this conversation, I think the time is right. It's a broader conversation. It's around flood protection of the town. And I know that was on the table in the 90s. It's probably very opportune to put it back on the table now. Have a broad conversation around, what levels of protection are you happy with? People are sick of us telling them what we can't do. There are actually some things we can tell them we can do. And Iwatia Marae is an example. My understanding is there is a possible way of isolating them from the effects of the flooding. And that was a conversation I carried on after our Māori meeting yesterday with the guys back in our local office who've been dealing with this thing for 20 odd years. So, and may I also put a plug in for two managers. One, Mike Adey, who was fearless in his approach at times, but has done a lot of work over a long time. But it's interesting to get a fresh set of eyes. Gans was up there last week, and it's Graham Hansen, and immediately he sees some things we can do to have a positive effect on the outcome of the river. Fantastic, great news music to my ears actually. So happy to be involved, and the Mayor is looking for solutions as well. May I also add that their wastewater consent, which does come due in a couple of years, the flavour I'm getting, and I said it yesterday at a public meeting and happy to repeat it again today, is there'll be very strong pushback for continued wastewater dumping in that river, regardless of the conditions. So they've got a real challenge. Well, the whole community has a real challenge in front of it. But that's the flavour I'm picking up right around town from various interested parties. So the sooner that this regional council can engage in that conversation, I know they've set up a group, but the sooner that we can get a seat at that table for someone, who possibly not a politician, maybe one of our good science folk, the better in my view, because it's going to be a hell of a challenge to a community that is going to struggle to pay for it, whatever happens. So.
Thank you, Ben. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. In my visits to Wairau in the last 7 or 8 months or so, which all of them have been really interesting and entertaining, and it's entertaining, absolutely entertaining. But one of the things that's pretty clear to me is that the status quo can't fail. There's a whole bunch of issues they've got up there, the bar being one of them, and as Councillor Wilson has intimated, it sort of connects to a whole bunch of other stuff. And I'm really pleased to see that Councillor Wilson is prepared to grab a hold of it and try and be the circuit breaker and get things done. So, thank you.
Yeah, before we move to the vote, I'd just like to comment too a little bit. Perhaps just getting that flavour of the issues around the river, perhaps we could have something like the Havelock Water Forum that we had. That was over 2 days, but and perhaps we do it and focus on Wairau because they've got these intense issues, and as many of us could go as possible, we do a forum like that, because people like the deputy of the Maori Committee, Paul Kelly, I've heard him speak 3 times now of the effect on his marae, and it's pretty devastating when the sewer floods into the land around the marae and the rats are leading it. You know, there's some seriously worrying issues around wastewater, sewerage, the river height, the flooding. So it's a whole lot of issues that maybe we could have a dedicated focus around this, similar to what we had with the Havelock water crisis. So perhaps I'll talk to you later about that, James, because I think bringing all the information together at once would be really useful. Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder. Peter, do you want to comment any further? All those in favour of the recommendations as presented? Aye. Against? We'll move to 21. Oh, Mr. Taylor's. Okay, comment on Mr. Taylor's.
Just a question. So this was the video we
Yeah, the
had.
land.
So is
the video.
that, I'm just looking at the Councillor Advocate, for want of a better description, Councillor Hewitt. But this was the southern end of the. This was
Yeah, no,
this
that's
was the
not right.
Hastings end
Yeah,
of the.
that's
Have
right.
I got that right? I'm just asking that question. Yeah.
I had the same question. I mean, why have we got to the Tamatea, Taifenua and myself? I think that's
Yeah, no, that's wrong.
that's
Yeah,
incorrect.
yeah, we
But
need
if I could just add to Councillor Wilson's questions, I actually thought that this was a management issue in the first instance with the works group, and also a pollution hotline issue. I didn't see it as a Tuki catchment restoration issue, well maybe ultimately, but I don't think we've captured this gentleman's concerns in the recommendations here at all.
No, I tend to agree with that. Does anyone confirm? Paul?
Yeah, no, sorry, thank you, Chair. I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Hewitt too, is that I'm not entirely certain what 21.2 is the purpose of that in this particular recommendation. But I would say that the issues raised by Mr. Taylor are some that have been brought to my attention by a number of the members of the public, and specifically one around access to the rivers. That's not only the Tuki but also other rivers in the region. And I'm just wondering whether at some stage we shouldn't put together some sort of group or some sort of discussion around how we're going to deal with that issue with river access, with keys from the gates that people can't get into the river when they want to, and there's a whole bunch of other issues that maybe we need to revisit and just have a look at again. But that'll be for another time. But certainly, yeah, I'm not entirely sure why 21.2 is in here.
Tom?
So I would move simply 21.1 and 21.3 if we need to. It seems pretty clear that we should have some follow-up to this. He had some pretty dramatic evidence that he put on the table. I was going to question the chief executive as to whether he could see this reach of the river from his property, and perhaps he could be our on-the-scene monitor of
Just before you do that, James, I think it'd be useful for Mr. Taylor to come back in here and because some of our senior staff weren't available to see those videos, and they were quite compelling. I think this has to be dealt with at a very senior level. So if we can frame 21.2 around that somehow. I think we need to take this seriously until we know otherwise.
So you don't think 21.1 does that?
Yeah, Chair, if I could make a suggestion here.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I can see what you're getting at, but the important thing is that the staff have been asked to investigate Mr. Taylor's complaints, and I'd be really disappointed if that investigation wasn't full and thorough,
Okay,
because Mr. Taylor's complaint's only one of it's one of an issue around what's actually going on down the rivers. So I hope that the investigation is as broad as it needs to be.
We'll move it, Tom, for just 21.1 and 21.3. Do we have a seconder? We have a seconder. Anyone else want to talk about it? All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried. Number 22, submission from Mr. Boyce, 101. Do we have a mover?
Do you know where that one was?
Yeah, 109.
Sorry, that was the submitter who provided the water folio. It was handwritten and it included drawn maps
Yeah.
with suggestions of, operational type interventions.
So that was all part of his, because there was a letter for it,
Yeah.
sort of thing, and then everything
right.
after that is also his?
Yeah. Do we have a mover? Sorry. Thank you, Alan. Do we have a seconder? Tom? Tom, do you wish to discuss it?
No.
Okay, anyone wish to discuss it? If all those in favour?
Aye.
21.1, 21.2, against, it's carried.
Mr. Chairman, are we going to take up the Hastings request for $100,000?
We're going to discuss that. James, we need to discuss that Hastings one. We'll do this one, then we'll do the Hastings one. Oh, we do? Yeah.
Well, yeah. Liam, were you proposing to go through the late items?
We're going to try.
Or just the Hastings one?
Just the Hastings one. Okay, we're going to do number 22. Oh no, we've got to, that is the year. So we'll do the Hastings proposal. So James, you could just take us through that, please.
Thank you, Chair. So item number 3, councillors, in your further submissions document that was provided in the last
Sorry, sorry to interrupt you, James, but there's a 23 here.
There is,
on
but
the back.
before we conclude that, which
We've got to do the other
is
one.
the rounding out of the rates increase. There's just one more item to deal with here. So we've received a letter from the Hastings District Council. They have allocated funding of $100,000 for community assistance in relation to the Havelock North water incident. This is for individuals who are suffering or have suffered long-term symptoms or hardship, typically health-related issues. They have invited the Regional Council to join them in providing some level of assistance to the community. It's my advice to you that based on the fact that the Havelock North Water Inquiry found a number of areas in which the Regional Council failed in its duties or could have done better, that while may not have directly contributed to the Havelock North water incident, may have certainly indirectly contributed, that there is I think there is an expectation that the Regional Council has some responsibility with regard to the impact on the community from the incident, and therefore I think it's appropriate that the Council does make a contribution to such a community assistance scheme alongside the District Council. My further advice to you would be that allocating a sum greater or less than the District Council will possibly create some optical issues, and I think it's very difficult to get into a debate as to who's more responsible than the other. It's probably not a fruitful debate that we would want to stoke at this point in time. So I'd recommend that a matching allocation of $100,000 be made, and that be funded from the Regional Disaster Reserve Fund that has funded to date the Council's response to the Havelock North inquiry.
Is there any money left in it?
Yes, there is.
But, Councillor, through you, Mr Chair, the present time the fund is about 2.8 million, and the council policy is that the 2.75 is the minimum level. It's a council policy, it can be changed, but dividends and interest earned on those investments continue to be put in, so even though it's getting close to the minimum, by the end of the year it'll top up again. So we'll be close, but I think there's money in there.
Fenton?
Happy to move 100,000 to match the Hastings contribution.
Do we have a seconder?
I was going to say, I'm very tempted to suggest that we put $200,000 up and ask Hastings District to increase their offer by, or their participation by 100, because $200,000 for the number of people who have suffered badly from this is nothing. I mean, I have an ex-neighbour who's lost his job, had to fix himself, and it cost him $20,000. That's just one person. There must be dozens of stories like that. So I mean, I don't want to appear niggardly, and I'd rather, as I say, that we pass a motion putting up $200,000 and invite them to match it.
We'll see if there's a seconder for my one first, Chair.
Yeah, we better see if there's a seconder. You have seconded. We have a mover and a seconder, so, and you've made your point, Peter?
So, well, I'm going to move it. But the mover and seconder have to speak first, I think.
Yeah. Fenton?
Thank you, Chair. I think can't speak on behalf of Hastings, and but I can speak as a councillor at Hawke's Bay Regional, and I'm not sure we're ever going to get enough money to fully compensate everyone that has a range of issues, some unintended consequences of this, which could be a huge figure, or it may not be much more than 200,000. Who would know? And if the Hastings Council has done its share of homework in its community, which I'm sure it has, I'm comfortable to go to their level for now, secure in the knowledge that actually subsequent to this there may be another conversation. So I'm happy to match this for now based on some very sage advice from our Chief Executive, not trying to make a minority discussion out of what Councillor Bevan says, who actually lives there and has been part of the challenges that community's faced, and I respectfully say that, but in this instance, considering what we've been asked to do, I'm happy to support in kind, at a equal level.
Thank you. Neil?
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't want to debate really whether this is sufficient compensation. It's clearly not. But it needs to be put in the context of the funding already attributed to Havelock North, central government sources and other agencies and previous council support. I'm much more interested in resolving and fixing the future, if you like, the future supply, and I'm reluctant, in fact, to even contribute 100,000 in consideration of the past, but I can see the potential benefits for it. But I think our best approach is to put any further consideration of funding into the dialogue, the discussion, and fixing the problem. And I would suggest that we've got several hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to go in order to do that. I think that's the contribution that ultimately those people affected in that area need, is a real sustainable solution. And we've already had information that is of concern in terms of what the future lies for the water sources, and we need to fix that. So yes, support 100,000. I don't think we need to go more. I certainly don't think we should go less given the situation. But I think that's a sufficient indication to the constituents of Havelock North that yep, we made mistakes and we recognise the compensation that you need.
Chair, yeah, I'd like to move an amendment that the amount be increased from 100,000 to 200,000. If I have a seconder.
Do we have a seconder for that amendment? It lapses.
Nobody, it lapses.
Do we have any other discussion around this? Yes, Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to support Councillor Bevan's motion, but I don't think any amount of money is going to be satisfactory recompense for the people in Havelock North that were affected. The only concerns I have about the particular funding that we've applied for is I have concerns that about the way we communicate this grant, or whatever we want to call it, the funding. because to date our communications around the Havelock North issue have not been particularly, I don't believe been, we haven't front-footed a lot of the issues. They've been front-footed by the Hastings District Council. So I want to be assured from the staff, and I'm sure that it will be, that this fund will be seen as a joint fund, and that it won't be seen as an initiative from one particular council or the other, and that we're both equally involved in it. I think that's a really important point for us to get across.
Any other speakers? Tom? Back to you, Peter.
It does seem to me that there is a third party involved here as well, and I'm not quite sure why the invitation hasn't been extended to the DHB as well to contribute to this. There's another set of hands that have been spanked a bit in this process. So I think we have no idea yet what the total public purse liability is going to be on this issue. People are being advised to get claims into the ACC now before clock runs on those, and government has yet to speak to any of those issues. There could be personal liability claim, all sorts of things yet to happen here. So to me, this $100,000 is a reflection of a certain amount of guilt, if you will, on our part for being part of this calamity. But it does really, it's just as Peter has said, it's really goes nowhere probably in terms of meeting what the actual need is, and so whoever is going to have to decide how to fairly divvy out this fund, God bless them. I don't know how they're going to possibly do that, but is there any expectation that the DHB might contribute to this?
Not to date. Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I'll support this anyway, of course. I just felt that this was an opportunity for us to show some leadership as a group, and you know, Paul's indicated that we've got sufficient funds to be able to make a more substantial contribution to this. The comments that have been made around the fact that probably no amount of money is going to be enough have some validity, of course. But this is my community. I've seen quite a bit of the suffering at first hand, and it is going to be very difficult to meet the sufferings of a number of people with what is a relatively small amount of money. And I thought $400,000 might be way better than $200,000 to try and you know, meet the pain and suffering that some of the members of this community have been through.
Are there any other speakers? You, Finn, do you want to?
I'll just quickly sum up.
Oh, I'd like to speak first. Please. So I've heard everybody, and I have really strong sympathies for what Peter has said, because you know, none of us expected the lingering effects of this dreadful situation, and some people have really had a hard time of it and have suffered enormous financial loss. Not just the shopkeepers, but we're talking about people who have had to pay for extra medical care and haven't been able to go to work, and et cetera, et cetera. It's been a really dreadful time for a lot of them. And you would need a large amount of money to be able to fairly compensate them for that angst that they've gone through. I think this is really a beginning of a journey, the $100,000 which Hastings District have proposed and ask us to match. And I think in the first instance we should match this and see how it goes, and perhaps we're going to have to revisit this again in the future. But I thought Councillor Curtin really outlined it pretty perfectly. So, Councillor Wilson, would you like to sum up?
Oh, I think it's all been said. I was going to draw everyone to the last sentence and invite our Chief Executive to take a hearing form over to Hastings Chief Executive, but in the light of the conversation and the seriousness of the issue, I will not say that. So.
Oh, you've returned. Great stuff. Okay, so we've summed up. We have a mover and second for $100,000 to support the Hastings grant here. We'll figure out how we allocate it, because Tom's point, I wouldn't want that job in 1,000 years. We have to figure out how we do that. So all those in favour? Aye. Against? It's unanimous that we support that.
Chair, just before we move on, can I clarify whether any councillor or yourself, Chair, have any interest in being involved in that criteria setting? We'll certainly report it back, or would you like staff to develop that with the Hastings District Council staff?
I think you should develop it with their staff, personally.
Thank you, Chair.
Could I just make another observation about that
It's
too?
hard.
Could I just make another observation about that while you're doing that?
Yeah.
In doing that, could you say to the Hastings District Council that if they have any ideas like this in the future, how about consulting us when it's in the formative stages, rather than making a decision and then making us appear to jump to the same level? If they want cooperation, cooperation starts a long way back further down the track than that. And I felt that this was a very poor process on their behalf when they're saying they're offering the hand of friendship. I didn't sense that.
In fairness, the Mayor of Hastings has kept me briefed with this right along their journey.
So you're at fault.
I'm at fault.
Well, I didn't feel that. Still not feeling that at all.
No, well, that's true. Okay, number 23, which wraps us all up. Are we going to get them up?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
23.2, I personally don't think it's appropriate to put that in there. I think you're leading with your chin. And I don't see the need for it to be there.
I tend to agree with that, but
Sorry?
I agree with that.
Yeah. So I'm prepared to move, subject to the 23.2 being deleted.
Can we have some discussion?
I
What
just
about
had a
you, Tommy?
question, Chair. We make a very specific comment in 23.6 about the support, and there was a lot of support. But there was also a group of people, and to me 23.1 doesn't cover it accurately or explicitly enough, who supported the Kickstart initiative but didn't want a rates increase. And it was as clear as that. Felt we should be doing that anyway, or should be finding other sources of funding, etc. And there, maybe the 23.1 there was concerns about rates affordability, obviously, but if we're going to be so explicit in the last one, we actually need to be as explicit, recognising those people and thanking those people that supported the initiative but didn't want a rates increase to cover it. I don't know how you deal with that.
Well, thank you for that. Leanne, we'll think about that while Peter has his...
Yeah, so look, the other thing I'd like to raise in relation to this was that a lot of people who were opposed to the rate increase to cover the cost of the hotspots initiative that was in the annual plan proposal were opposed to it because they don't trust us, and they're saying you've had opportunities to do X, Y, and Z and you haven't done it. And I'm actually thinking that one of the things that we might do in response to that is to actually establish some milestones against which we can measure our progress in dealing with these hotspots, and I think we should incorporate that into these recommendations, and I think we should be reporting back to the people who submitted on this rates increase to say that that's what we're going to do.
Think about how you write that down, or we'll come to Neil.
Mr. Chair, I totally agree with what Peter's just had to say. I think that's a great suggestion. I don't know if the Chief Executive has got time to pen something that looks like that. But my issue, it's a separate issue, Mr. Chair, and it relates to 23.6. And in the last line where it says the additional one-off 5% rate, I think that's misleading. That would indicate that we're somehow going to return 5% next year. Well, that's not going to happen. It is an ongoing 5%.
Well, in fact, is it relevant for that line to be in there as well? I mean, if you're thanking the ones who express support for the kickstart, what are you saying to those that said, well, no rates increase or a 4.8? You're not going to thank them.
Well, that was the point that Peter's alluding to, isn't it?
Well,
Debbie, have you? Oh, sorry.
I'll take that line out as well, actually.
Do you agree with that?
I agree, Mr. Chair. No, sorry,
Just
to
before
cut
we
across
go
you.
on.
I just wondered whether, in fact, we delete the whole thing and going back to 23.1 acknowledges the concerns expressed,
rate for it.
concerns and support expressed.
And that, leave it as that. Okay, right, let's get rid of that. Debbie, what have you got?
Thank you. James, can you just please explain to me, is this going to be the last opportunity, or do we then go on and vote on the increase separately? Or is this it?
No, so Mr. Jury is recommending that we add a final recommendation to this list, which would be 23.7, and it is confirmed the rate increase for the 2017-18 annual plan will be 9.88%. So that's not currently there now, and does need to go in.
But question on that, it won't be that. You've got an extra 50,000 in there, 54,500. So it won't be 9.88%.
So the 50,000.
No, he found that elsewhere.
We've found it within the existing budget,
So it
and we'll
doesn't-
find the 4.4 as well. So we're not proposing to increase that.
Yeah. So it is what it is. So we just take out, it's actually 3.6 because you've removed 6.
We're taking out all of those specifics, is that right?
I don't know if that's right or not, actually.
In the past, we've secured the rate at the council meeting.
Have we?
Or no change to the
Or,
proposal.
Yeah,
it's
no
got to be
change.
one of them.
Yeah. Just put
that
no change.
clarifies it.
And we'll bring that to the council meeting then. Okay, what have we got?
Sorry, I'll just take your
That's fine.
councillors' advice on how you want the rest of the recommendations, whether to delete the remainder of the specifics. And then just have makes no change to the annual plan, as that was the intention? Yes.
That's it? Is everyone happy with that?
So I need to be clear on, we're making no change, it means we're at 4.8.
No.
No, 9.88 is actually in the draft annual plan.
So it makes no change to the draft.
Well,
Yeah.
The proposed in fact.
There needs to be a note to that the resultant rate increase will be, 9.8 or
I
whatever.
would have thought so.
Yeah.
It's clear to
It's
everyone
clear.
there. Yeah. So can we do that?
Just noting that the
Yeah.
resultant
Of the
rate
above.
increase.
Yep.
Does that say it?
Make it, I'll change including to,
Confirming?
what did I say before? My brain stopped functioning. Yeah, something like
The
that.
this does result in, you said, this will result in, confirm this will result in an increase, rate increase of 9.8%. Yep. Okay, we have that before us.
Could I
Well,
just
Rick,
ask,
then you, Peter.
can we express this differently than as a percentage? Can we have an average, this will result in an average rate increase of X dollars per?
We could, but we've been down that trail in all our individual meetings. This is the facts. We know that in Flaxmere this means that it's a rate increase of $7.50 or $11. I've forgotten what it was per year. And I think we've mentioned that at our meetings. We've consulted But this is what it is.
But even then, that's not correct.
Sorry?
We're going to take up all the other things that the council levies rates on. Well, this changes part, changes. If you go and take all of the other rates that the council levies, and then you go and add what we've put the increase in here, if you add the mix up differently, you won't get 9.88.
You will.
Overall?
You will on a rates increase. Yeah, the total rates increase is effectively 9.88% over and above what we're collecting this
And
current
it breaks up
financial year.
differently to all the,
But the impost of that is different across ratepayers.
yeah, hugely different.
Yeah.
Your point taken. Oh, Peter?
I have suggested some suggested wording for milestone, which would become 23.2, I guess.
Point 3, yeah.
Agrees to develop milestones against which progress in dealing with the hotspots initiative.
Which was effective, the 5%, Peter,
Yep.
put in there.
Can be measured.
Which related, can we say which related to 5%?
Okay, will be measured, sorry.
I would have been quite keen in 23.2 to put that 5% of the rates increase actually related directly to those hotspots initiatives.
I don't think that's necessary, Chair. I mean, that's what the whole consultation was about.
I know, but I'm just trying to allude to Rick's point. Mm. Well, do you think say what they were in there in our?
No, you just put,
It's just getting too
put the
long.
percentage of the rates that it
Yeah.
was. How much was it, Paul?
5%.
Well, it's 5% for the hotspot million. Yeah.
So you say milestone which President dealing with the hotspots initiatives, which being 5% part of 5% of the rate increase.
Yeah, being 5% of the rate increase.
So yeah, representative.
Or funded by.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Funded by. Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. Funded by. I think that's nice and clear. Do we have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Clerk. And a seconder, just to speak, Neil? Peter, do you wish to speak?
Well, it's been a long and exhaustive process as ever, but I think we've actually met some of the concerns that have been raised by this through the submissions process without adding greatly to the original proposal, so I'm pretty happy with the outcome.
Did anyone else wish to speak? Alan?
I wish to raise a matter about one or two submissions that I think somehow or another have to be responded to, and they haven't been embraced in this, but I'll leave that till after.
Okay. Debbie, did you have a comment on this? I'm sorry we didn't raise them, Alan. I thought we had captured. Okay.
Okay, so I don't support the rates increase. I've supported it at the annual plan increase, and I think in conclusion the consultation has lacked clarity. We have gone out without a plan, and I don't think that we should be rating for plans to be written. We should be rating with a plan. So I also think that the consultation has done a service to the huge amount of work that the Regional Council has been doing over many years now, and what it has done is it's fueled speculation that council has in fact been ineffective and wasting their money, and there's been speculation that farmers haven't been active in their part, when in actual fact we've got the regional land care scheme, and there's a huge amount of rural investment to date that has gone unacknowledged in terms of the spend already going on. The amount of expectation in some of the catchments on enhanced environmental management plans is just in thousands and thousands, and we saw it from submitters from Wairau all the way through to Central Hawke's Bay. So in order to be just adding another tax on just because we can has disenfranchised quite a number of our rural community. I really did appreciate our past chair coming in, Rex McIntyre, and his words of wisdom, which I thought were really, really wise. And he said, don't rate the hell out of people just because you can. And so, not that I would have used all of those words myself, but he was cautioning us against a responsibility we have and an ability to take the community with us in terms of our discussions. So I can't support the 9.88, and I wasn't getting that clarity from the constituency that I represent. But I think one of the texts that I received that summed it up quite nicely was targeted rates for a targeted outcome and a general rate for a slush fund, no thanks. So I won't be voting in favour of the final one. Thank you.
Thank you. Debbie, Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I must say, for someone who's been through this process for the first time, it's been absolutely fascinating. I've really, really enjoyed it. It has been a lot of hard work, a lot of reading, a lot of consideration, a lot of thought gone into it. And it's also been the other part of it I found really, really interesting is the feedback I've got from my community, which has been really, really positive about the direction that this council is going in. So I'd just like to acknowledge all those people that have commented me not only in the street but have rung me up, have made comment on social media to me about how pleased they are with these, like I say, with the direction we're going in. And I'd also like to acknowledge that certainly I'm pleased that we've got 23.2 in there because I think that covers a lot of the concerns that were raised to me about this particular process. Thank you.
Hey, I just want to apologise, Neil. I should have gone to you first. So you're on now, mate, and you get 2 goes. No, I forgot to get you as the mover.
Sure. Well, Mr. Chair, have been through a few of these rounds now. I think it's round 13 for me. And I would say I've picked up a very substantive support particularly for the hotspot investments. I think there are a number of submitters who challenged our global spending, but essentially were supportive of the initiatives we were looking to take right across the region. And I would have to say that each of those, the general fund applications that we're making are well spread with major projects in each part of the region, and that's a good thing. I'd also comment, Mr. Chair, that in terms of overall direction, what this annual plan does and the rating assumptions that rating parameters we've put around it does include the continuation of the Ruataniwha Dam and its scheme and associated spending. Something like 60 million is still sitting there pending decisions, but nevertheless sitting there for expenditure in one part of the region, and that's good. It may be in one part of the region. I'd hate to think what would happen if we targeted rate that sort of expenditure in that location. It's not about that. It's about what is good for the region and is this a good project across the board. So I make that point that this increase in rates, 9.88%, 5% the addition, given that the plan was to in fact spend 4.8 in any event, an additional 4.8. We've got 5% targeted for some very specific and worthwhile programs, and I think my sense of this is that the ratepayers of this region broadly support it, I think the evidence is very clear from the submissions that we've heard and those other comments that we pick up in the community.
Thank you, Neil. Peter, I need to come back to you because you were the seconder. Do you wish to comment as the seconder?
No, Chair.
Okay, now, Tom, then you.
I think we've been given qualified permission by our ratepayers to spend an additional 5%, an additional $1.2 million. And I think the qualifications that have been put on this are, in one respect, captured by Peter's amendment, which requires us to demonstrate some action and actual progress against what we've said we were going to do. A lot of those folks were saying, no words, action, no plans, action, 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 action. Why haven't you been doing this all along? We thought you were. Action, action, action. So now we've said we're going to spend $1 million plus over 1 year to demonstrably make a beginning here, a kickstart, as we've said, and we damn well better show something as a result of this by the time we're also now going on the heels of this and consulting for a long-term plan, which will be compounding, most likely, the ask we're about to make at that point. In the public meeting that Rex and I had, there was, in the Havelock North Heartland, it was more political rally. I mean, do this, please do this. But the refrain was really clear that so far councils, the regional council, as this historic entity, has not delivered in these very areas that you now say you intend to. So there's going to be a lot of scrutiny as to whether we actually make anything out of this $1 million. And that's why I think the milestoning process on this is really critical. I also think what we did not communicate very effectively in the consultation, and hopefully we'll get some monies from the government that help us do this, but the leveraging aspect of this that we are assuming in this process, that we are going to be able to bring some other resources behind what we do in the coming year. And I don't know what the timetable is as to when we begin to hear whether we've been successful or not, but hopefully we will be, and as soon as we are, I think we have to be as clear as we can be as to how that is adding to the resource at our disposal to do the things we claim we're going to do here.
Thank you. Yeah, Fenton?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Ironically, I sort of agree with everything everyone said so far, qualified support from the public, albeit for two outstanding issues for me, which means I won't be supporting this. And the first one is the one-off rates increase. For whatever reason, we poorly articulated the fact that this is now the new normal. It's not a one-off. I've explained to a few people, not many to be fair, who've said for a one-off $10 or $15 we get all this stuff fixed up. I said no, that now becomes the new normal and we're still in a planning phase. Apparently, building on good work we've done, I acknowledge that. But the key issue for me that I just can't get past is the fact that we have leveraged this money, which we are only just now about to endorse. We've leveraged this money against the government fund in a very predetermined manner, which means, and I will be asking the auditor to have a bloody good look at this, which means that we've gone out to our community and said, trust us, we're doing a good job, and in the background, we've actually already leveraged the proposed fund. I may have that wrong, but I've heard it twice now in public meetings, been acknowledged, even heard it acknowledged today. And it's all there on tape, which is a good thing. So I can't support this on the basis that we've gone to our community saying we're going to do all these great things in the meantime, we've already agreed to the funding by leveraging it against this government fund, and I totally disagree with that.
Thank you. Any other comment? Rick.
Thank you, Chair. This is a case of damned if you do and damned if you don't. We all know, and the community knows, that Lake Whātuma is in a terrible state and something needs to be done. We all know that the Karamu River is in a terrible state, disgraceful state. We all know that Lake Tūtira is in a disgraceful state. And the entity which is most responsible for doing anything about it to fix it is this one here. Now, we can find a million reasons to do nothing. We can find reasons not to get out of bed. It's too risky. We find reasons not to do anything. What it does take is it takes some courage to do something. Well, I'm not going to surrender to any of the reasons for doing nothing, to do nothing. I didn't come here to do nothing. I came here to see things improved. And I would have thought this is the most modest, limited thing that we have proposed here ever. This council went and proposed to spend $80 million on a dam. That's big. This is minuscule in comparison, and I don't understand the nervousness. Now, as with regard to Fenton, raises a legitimate question, pure process, easily solved, but it's a spook to try and say, oh, this is all wrong. Well, as Fenton knows, we come to these things every year, year on, year out. And when we come to having gone to complete this year, and we've gone through the $1 million, done what we did, and if this council decides it needs to continue, or wishes to continue, it will, in my view, put a number of other programs up beside it as contestable. Now, there have been a number of things which have been said here already which people are against. Now, I'm not going to predetermine what that will be, but we know that we have options. And if we choose to proceed with this work, well then we can find the money for it. We might not do some of the other things we're doing. We just might go to the ratepayer and say we need more money. But I would have thought having these hotspots identified, making a good start on them, would be a way of saying to the community that we've said what we're going to do and we've done it, and give them confidence in it for the next step. I think this is one of the most limited, easy reaches I've ever come across. This is something we should simply do, and I vote with it with both hands.
Anybody else? Well, you want to wind up, Neil, so you can hold? Does anyone else? Oh, before Neil winds up, my perspective is that is very much similar to Rick's. We came here to do things. Our community voted us in to do things. And when we did our workshop and we decided that, you know, we can't do everything, but if we focus on the worst situations that we have in our environment and just try and do a couple of good steps forward, our community will at least see that we're moving forward. When we went to our staff, they said, we don't have anything in the plan to do that. So we decided to go out to the public and say, and tell our story and say, this is what we want to do. We know it's limited. We know that it's not everything you want, but at least it's a step in the right direction. And as Tom said, in most cases, the only meeting I didn't get to because I was away was the Napier meeting, but in all others, we got very strong support, certainly in the Hastings area. Not so strong in Waipakarau and Wairua, certainly, but it wasn't violently against. Most people there were saying, well, we've got to do something. They recognised the problems. So I don't think we had severe objections to our plan from those areas. I agree with Councillor Barker. This is minuscule. This is, we cannot fix the problems. Nobody in the public believes we can fix the problems with this amount of resource, but we're at least going to begin and get on the road to fixing them. And in some cases, such as Tutera, it's going to be a long journey. So I very strongly support this process and this rate increase. Councillor Curtin, would you like to wind this up?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I won't repeat the very important words that yourself and Councillor Barker have had to say about the need to get on and do these things. That they are self-evident. We do have to do them. The expenditure of $1 million or 1.1 or whatever it is a very minimal that we ought to expend in this direction. I think in listening to some of the issues that raised in submission and perhaps in debate now, particularly from Councillor Wilson, around the process we've gone down to progress this. Firstly, there are detailed plans, and I congratulate the staff, Ian and his team, for producing plans in each of those initiatives which are detailed, comprehensive, and very workable. The thing about them is they are applications to central government funds which leverages the $1 million odd that this council, the ratepayers, are putting up, and at least doubles that. And that's important. I would suggest that we would be remiss, it would be very unfortunate if, and the ratepayers would have something to say if this council didn't put its hand up and bid for that opportunity. And this is an opportunity to essentially double the value that we're getting out of this 5% rate increase.
Order quadruple.
Quadruple? Yes, you're right, Mr. Chair. So the point is this. We are not bound by that application for those funds. If we so chose, we could say, sorry, we don't want to progress those with central government. I'm not sure why we'd do that, but nevertheless, in terms of the concerns raised in debate, there is no sense that we have somehow preempted the decisions we're about to make, nor have we preempted and drawn a conclusion that we will receive those funds. We've simply made an application for them. And if we aren't successful with them, we just downscale the projects that we've got on hand. So, Mr. Chairman, there is no concern in my mind. There's only urgency in getting on with these tasks and making sure that we are sure-footed going forward to make the corrections we need.
Thank you, Neil. We have a mover and a seconder for the motion. Everyone understands what we're voting on. All those in favour? Aye. Against? No. Division. All those in favour? Raise your hand. You get those. All those against? Thank you. The motion is carried. Thank you very much. We'll break for lunch, team.
Mr. Chairman, I think I should actually get out of here and take my germs with me. But
okay.
I'm very concerned that I'll be missing the HPUD's consideration. I missed the last one as well.
Could you stay and we could take it straight away? Would you like to do that? We just go straight into HPUD's and then you leave after that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair.
Yeah, meeting's closed, yes.
Chair, there were two things that I had listed here that came up during the submissions that haven't been covered.
Can we cover them this afternoon?
Well, we're not in formal session. That's all. So one was the strap line for the HBRC, and I don't know where that's sitting. I notice it is appearing in some of the drafts that I've seen that we'll look at this afternoon. And the second was somebody raised the issue of a channel at the Bayview end of the Ahuriri estuary.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure where that sits and how we're going to respond to that submitter.
That is actually going to sit with that's covered by that statutory board, that whole issue.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. It is going to be covered by them.
We did talk about it, well, I did raise it this morning, and I believe it's a matter that seriously needs to be looked at.
It is,
I agree.
It's just, since it's been under DOC control, the drainage there has been allowed to just
That's right.
Disappear.
disappear.
Mr. Chair, there is opportunity when we adopt the plan on the 28th to consider any of these matters. Is that correct? I mean, we this is not the last chance to address any issues. Is that correct?
Paul leaving, I'm just not sure on timing, Leanne, do you know where we're at?
And Alan, you had an extra issue too, didn't you? Was that it?
I can't see why not.
For example, a submission from Graham and Margaret Cowley, number 112, I see no reference to it in officers' responses, but they raised two things about public transport and seeing 30, 40-seater buses travelling around the city with a mere handful of passengers. Well, you know, the answer to that is that big buses can do what small buses can do, but small buses can't do what big buses do. And then, no, it's not a joke, it's true, it's true. And then here, down the bottom, although I do not have in-depth knowledge of all the financial aspects of HBRC operation, I'm left wondering why, for example, there was recently significant expenditure on artwork and beautification of the chairman's office when the council knew the region was facing blah blah. Now, you know, that's not, that is an error. So
Yeah, it's definitely an error.
in the response,
Just because the
and
chairman
everyone gets
wanted
a
it, he didn't
response
get
like
it. Don't I?
this. Those things really need to be covered, don't they?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a suggestion?
Could you write them a letter, Liz?
Yes, I was going to say, when we go through and do all the responses, we'll cross-check that every point's been
Okay.
discussed and perhaps clarify that kind of situation. I mean, if there was something that either of you have found that you believe still needs a substantive council
That one will
decision,
get covered.
you need to bring that to our attention. But anything else, we can just cover off in the letter that will go out under the chairman's signature.
I'm happy.
I'll be happy to sign that one.
And on the transport one, I wanted to be in there in quotes, Chairman Alan Dick says. Words.
And Peter, are you happy that your one?
Put in a little booklet.
Peter, are
Words
you
from
happy
Chairman
your one falls in under that
Chairman Alan.
Aharuta? Okay, we're going to close the meeting. Closed.